Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a US elections special prior to the debate that's due to take place shortly on ABC that so many people are hotly anticipating, and it could define where this election goes. It could be a critical moment. Many people are thinking it is. They're waiting with bated breath as to see how Harris performs or how Trump performs, and woe is each candidate if it goes badly for one or the other. There is an argument that is the case, and in fact this is a supremely important moment of the campaign cycle, or that one person will do well, one person will do badly, but actually after a few weeks it'll be forgotten and you'll get back to the general campaigning. It's thought it's probably going to be the only debate. It depends whether it goes badly for one and they want to redress that balance and call for another debate, and then the other person goes, well, it went really well before, let's do it again. Lots of different options here, but I think it is important. I think that the race has tightened up, and we're going to be looking at some polls in some detail soon, just later in this video. It is the closest race in history. I think there is never been a race before where the polls have not shifted one way or the other more than or less than 5% consistently throughout the race. So this has been statistically the closest race ever. I mean, it blows my mind. You know my beliefs. I'm not a big fan of Trump, and I just can't believe that having had one tenure and then 4 years of him whinging and whining and then a felon and all of this stuff and the nonsense he's saying at the moment, he is still as popular as he is. Although I do think he's got a hard ceiling, and he almost certainly will not win the popular vote. The question is, will he get votes in the right place for him to be able to squeeze over the line? I think he's got a hard ceiling, and I don't think he's prepared to try and steal the electorate, the voters from these demographics that he needs to. He needs to reach across the aisle, take some Democrats. He needs to get those independents, get those swing voters. And I think he's just playing to his base too much, and he's still continuing to do that at the moment. What he's saying at his rallies, I don't think are doing what he's not saying what he needs to say and doing what he needs to do to win that larger vote share. It's also interesting. I think statistics show that people know Donald Trump. So you know what you're going to get. And if people are still going to vote for him, and you know what he's like, then actually that's kind of baked in. There is more of room to grow for Harris, and this is what the statistics show, that there are in polls, there are still an awful lot of people that don't know what she's like, what she's about, who she is, right? There's a lot of low information voters out there in the United States that even though she's been VP, vice president for 4 years, she hasn't been at the forefront of media, and Biden has maybe kept her busy doing things here, there, and behind the scenes, and actually people don't know her. And as a result of not knowing her, she's got some area to grow into. And so this debate is going to be a lot about Kamala Harris introducing herself to the wider public. That was what the DNC was about. That's what this debate is about. Now, Trump in this debate should try and keep a handle on how he comes across in terms of I think he needs to just be calm and try and put more policy across. The problem is he's completely vacuous when it comes to policy, and he doesn't have the knowledge. And I think actually that's probably where Kamala Harris should try and push him. She needs to be prosecutorial, but also wave away any kind of demeaning personal attacks in a dismissive kind of way, rather than rise to them and it become combative like that. Just like she did in the interview on CNN, which is like same old tired tropes, like when Dana Bash talked about Trump having mentioned that she, has only recently become black type thing, and she just said, really? Yeah, same old tired tropes, next question please. And that's just like, dismiss it, stop being weird, stop being, what are you like? Yeah, whatever. that kind of dismissal might serve her better than getting embroiled in these petty attacks and backs and forths. Right. Okay. So yeah, I think that Kamala Harris, there's a lot to lose here if she has a poor debate performance. I think she's got more to lose maybe than Trump. What she needs to do is come out of this gaining more voters. Trump is unlikely to gain huge amounts of voters. There's this talk about a hard ceiling of 46, 47%. It's going to be, for him, it's going to be, and we'll talk about the individual states, gaining voters, just a number of voters in some key places. And that's what he needs to be aiming for. So a very, very directed, focused approach. Now, as you can see here from this NBC article, What to Watch, they talk about, obviously there are the rules of this debate. And I think it's possibly a case of many people expecting too much from this debate. So the debate will have to follow, or the debaters will have to follow the protocol and the rules of the debate. So it's going to be quite difficult for them to get across what they need to get across if the questions don't align to what they are hoping for. So there's certain things each of them want to say. There's only these sort of particular time frames they can do that, and it needs to be answering a question, then rebuttals, and so that there isn't the freedom to say, actually, I need to challenge Donald Trump on what he said last week and this crazy stuff on childcare. So how do I get that in? That would be Harris's approach. How do I get these certain talking points into the debate when it's already structured in this particular way? And the same for Donald Trump, is that there'll be certain things, he will be going for, I think he'll be trying to tie Kamala Harris to all the unpopular Biden things. And when I say that, I'm talking about perception, because perception is different from reality. So the American economy at the moment is functioning amazingly in relative terms to the rest of the world and other comparable countries. The US economy is absolutely flying, and all the stats are in America's favor, and therefore Biden and Kamala Harris's favor. They should be. There's this thing about inflation that people think the economy is worse now than it was at the height of Trump's tenure, but the reality is that for 14 straight months, the median or the mean wage, I think the median wage has been above inflation. So wage increases have been above inflation increases, basically, and that people still feel the inflationary pressures. They perceive the economy is not going well. Like, was it 70% of people still thinking the economy is in a really bad state? And it's just simply not true. But the perception is there. So how does Harris deal with that? Is one of her jobs is trying to sell the success of Bidenomics, while not tying herself totally to Biden and saying how good things can be if they can continue this trajectory, while Trump is going to try and say it is as bad as you think it is, that your perception is correct and actually it sucks, and it sucks because of Harris, and tie Harris to Biden in making those claims. So he's going to hammer home that perception is reality. And she's going to try and hammer home that actually the reality differs from your perception, and I need to sell you what we've done and try and change your perception, whilst also saying then this is how we can continue to improve things. So, for example, petrol prices gas prices have come down again. Oil prices are down to below $70 a barrel. So that will affect inflationary pressures, and things are generally, all the stats are good for Harris to sell. Like, she needs to sell that. So that's going to be definitely one of the areas of contention in the debates. I think this is an interesting question in this article. Is there enough time for Harris to accomplish all that she needs? There are some that are saying she just needs to come across as fairly competent, and hopefully Trump will hoist himself by his own petard and come across fairly, maybe too brash, maybe nonsensical, maybe not having enough knowledge on certain topics. She needs to just come across competent and knowledgeable and strong. And I think that shouldn't be too hard for her to do and not get drawn into certain areas. But yeah, will Trump speak more broadly beyond his base? That is the key question. That's what I keep saying, what I've already said in this video. He needs to speak beyond two people beyond his base. Will he do that? He'll have to be really restrained in order to do that. He'll have to be on point, and he'll have to really hammer home some of those talking points, not devolve into whether Haitian immigrants are eating cats and pets, and there's kind of these crazy rumors are going around at the moment, but talk about sensible issues with at least some kind of substance. Pity the moderators, and it is going to be interesting to see how much leeway the moderators allow. There's this kind of turning off the mics, but I think it's at the discretion of the moderators. Will they allow certain moments of each of the debaters to freestyle a little bit? I don't know. We'll see. So the debate is massively important, but you could also argue that it might be a little bit over-egged in its importance. I don't know. It's going to be fascinating. I'd love it if it was several hours earlier and I could do a live stream alongside it, because I think it would be fascinating. Right, we are now going to talk polls. Polls have been interesting. There has been a lot of talk about the Siena New York Times polls. So if you know your polling, Siena New York Times polls come out and they routinely annoy Democrats because they're never particularly good for Democrats. So if you look at the all these other polls on 538, you've got Harris up in all of these until you get to the New York Times Siena College polls. And everyone was reporting that and going, oh, woe is Harris, they're in trouble. And then you get all these other polls coming out. Morning Consult, Morning Consult, Big Village, Active Vote. And actually there's some other ones on Real Clear Politics here, such as, or some of these ones before. But the RCP average there is 1.1 up for Harris, and the average for 538 has Harris up 2.7. So, other than the New York Times Siena polls, things have been looking pretty solid for Harris. It is totally tight, though, and it's going to come down really to a number of key states, 7 of them, one might think. The national polling data isn't quite as indicative or predictive as certain states. And you could argue Philadelphia. This whole election is arguably about Philadelphia. We're going to look into that in a second. Let's go to Lewis Goodall, isn't it, here on Sky News.
There are 7 key states where this election is going to be decided. What does the latest data tell us about how each candidate is doing in each of these 7 states? Well, you can see here, full 7 swing states here: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, all in very different parts of the United States. And in each of them, if you're in the Harris campaign, you're looking at that. This is their polling lead average in each of these states. You're looking at that and thinking, well, that ain't bad. We are in front. Wisconsin, we're in front quite a lot. But look at the margins in all of these other states. Arizona, 0.3%. Georgia, 0.5%. Both states that Biden won back in 2020. North Carolina, Trump won it in 2020, but ahead only by 0.3%. And even in Michigan, Nevada, and the key state, we'll talk about it more in a minute, of Pennsylvania, all states won by Joe Biden back in 2020. We are talking about a really small poll lead. And bear in mind as well.
So I'm just pausing there because Arizona, that's going to be about, or largely about immigration. So that's something that the Republicans are going to be hammering home. Georgia is just tight as a gnat's chaff. You've got North Carolina, fascinating at the moment because actually that's looking slightly better for Harris with some polls that have just come out. We'll talk about one of those polls in a bit. And as he mentions, Pennsylvania, supremely important.
as well. All of these polls come with a caveat, the margin of error, i.e. they may be out by between 2 and 3%. So when you put that in mind and all of the other frailties we know about state polling, then we can see what this race really is a dead heat. If you're in a Harris campaign, you're not looking at that and thinking we are home and dry by any stretch of the imagination at all. So how does that translate into the actual electoral map? We know 270 electoral college votes you need to win. Let's have a look at these grey states here. Those are exactly the states that we were just talking about, the key swing states. And basically, we need to fill in that map in order to see who might get to 270. So let's, for the sake of...
And we're going to do that on my own map here. So we'll look at the real clear politics. You can do your own kind of interactive map here. This is the 2020 election map where Biden won 303, Trump 235 electoral college votes. And that seems like quite a large margin, but actually it can disappear. Like I've explained before, it's a kind of zero-sum game. So if you lose one state, the other team get that state. And so your numbers don't just go. So for example, if Nevada went to the Republicans, the Democrats would lose 6, but the Republicans would gain 6. So actually that's a difference of 12. That's really important. So that happens. And if they lose Arizona and if they lose Georgia, which is desperately close. Now, this is potentially where we're at the moment. So my opinion is that Wisconsin and Michigan are going to go Democrat. And the big battle is going to be about Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania has 19 electoral college votes. So even if the Democrats lose Nevada and lose Arizona and lose Georgia, which some people are saying is sort of likely or more than possible, if the Democrats hold Pennsylvania, essentially they've won the election. It's very close. There's here it doesn't have the, so it's put, I presume it's putting Nebraska's, because Nebraska's separate there. Oh, that's Maine, second one. Must have Nebraska up here. One of these. No, it isn't. So Nebraska's actually split. Oh, there it is. The second district, Nebraska. So actually, yeah, that fits inside there. Right. Anyway, I digress. So it's all about Pennsylvania. And actually, if we keep Nevada with the Democrats and we keep Georgia with the Democrats, right? So we get back to here. Then if they lose Pennsylvania, then actually they're not in a good place to lose any others. So Georgia goes, and then they've lost, right? There are now definitely there are more pathways for the Democrats to get to 270, which is what you need to get to. Sorry, so if I didn't explain that before. So 270 is where you want to get. 538 is the total number of electoral college votes. So they need to get to 270 to win either side. It's all about Pennsylvania. It really, really is. What's interesting now, though, is that North Carolina is in play for the Democrats. So there have been some interesting polls to show that that's in play. And if that is in play and North Carolina goes Republican, then actually they can afford to lose Pennsylvania much more and then maybe lose, I don't know, Arizona. So there are some more options that were not on the table some weeks ago. But most people are saying Pennsylvania is your big one because that is the most battleground of the battleground states. And we saw that, okay, that last, I think it was NBC polls that Sky News were using here, was those averages had Pennsylvania up 1.5 for the Democrats. But there are these different polls that are kind of all over the place, and they are showing some of these states are tied. You know, it's just really, really close all over the shop. So let's then go to look at Pennsylvania. And this video interested me because I'm a geek. He talks about the different counties and different districts within Pennsylvania state and how it actually all comes down to one particular area. And it's this one. I've timestamped it here.
Now, the one region nobody is talking about, everyone's so focused on Philadelphia, Western Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh area. There's one region that absolutely has devastated Democrats. It is the Lehigh Valley, or northeastern Pennsylvania. Now, back
When it says that's devastated, so previously has devastated them. With it's the key area basically.
in 2012, Barack Obama won this region by a small 0.2%, so it was very close. However, 2016, 4 years later, Hillary Clinton loses it by 21%. Huge number, actually 21.9%, almost 22%, a huge loss. Now, when Joe Biden comes in, they're the supposed hometown boy from Scranton, Pennsylvania, he gets about 17.5% of the vote in 2020, but the damage had already been done, and this is a place where Democrats have done poorly. So
he, as he corrected there, written on the screen, it's like reduces the gap to 17%, but actually it's still not nearly enough.
now, if we want to talk about Democrats improving here, this is where it's pretty good. This is where there's actually some good news. So back when Barack Obama won this area, he had 49% of the vote. And then when Hillary Clinton came in, she went all the way down to 37, with Joe Biden at about 40% of the vote in 2020. Now, the most recent New York Times Siena poll shows Kamala Harris at 43% of the vote in the northeast part of the state. If she pulls off 43% of the vote in this election, it's over. Democrats win, assuming.
So the northeast Lehigh Valley area of Pennsylvania, if she gets 43%, she's won the state, job done, and essentially won the election. So you could say this whole election is contingent upon the success of one side or the other in this particular area of Pennsylvania state. And I imagine they are going to be flooding this with adverts and visiting it really quite a lot.
Everything else stays stagnant, which, looking at the numbers over the last few cycles, it does seem like there's not going to be many shifts around the state, except for maybe this northeast section. If she gets 43%, game, set, match. It's over. Democrats win the state of Pennsylvania. Now, another thing that people aren't...
So, and then he goes on to talk about some more details there. I just want to go to his conclusion.
Concept, it's not going to work. What happens in the gubernatorial electorate? Circumstances. So don't just say that's going to replicate here.
So I'm just trying to get to the right place.
The Democrats do have their work cut out for them. I think they are in the position of advantage. They still have a voter registration advantage. The places where they can turn out the vote, like I said, the population is increasing in those counties, so that is a good thing as well. And with the latest poll numbers that we see out of northeast Pennsylvania, if Kamala Harris is able to get over 40%, chances are they're going to win the state. If she gets 43% or higher in the northeast part of the state, game over. It's done. Kamala Harris wins. So I think that the Democrats are in a good position to win the state of Pennsylvania, reestablishing the blue wall. But it will be hard. It will be close. But maybe not as close as some people think. That's just my pontification of the state. So thank you all very much for joining.
So I thought that was quite interesting, and that's good news for the Democrats, but of course it will be close and there's going to be a lot to fight for there. So these polls are close, but we are seeing the averages trend in favor of Harris, apart from, as mentioned, the Times Siena poll, New York Times Siena poll there. Now, there are a couple of other interesting moves as well. So one is in Georgia. So for the first time, according to Real Clear Politics, Harris has taken a narrow lead in Georgia, 48.3 to 48.2. So it's a 0.1 lead for Harris. And as you can see, that just hasn't happened in recent times. So this is really significant. If you then start saying, okay, it's all about Pennsylvania, but actually, if you don't have Pennsylvania, but say have Georgia, and if Georgia goes, then actually that gives you an indication maybe what North Carolina might do. So there are other ways, even if it doesn't go right in Pennsylvania, for the Democrats. For the Republicans, they really need to, well, again, they really need Pennsylvania and a few of these other ones to go in their favor. So North Carolina as well. Harris takes a lead in North Carolina, and that's according to Is that an average here on 538? Yeah, it says 538 polling average. So that's interesting. That's a 0.2 advantage in North Carolina, and that state was not in play previously. So North Carolina, again, that's another pathway. So really interesting polls, looking at these statewide polls that are so very important. Now, we can talk about the independents, the idea that, as we saw in that NBC article, Trump needs to expand his base in order to get over that, what looks like a hard ceiling of 46%. If he just keeps appealing to his base, he will only get 46%. And actually, Sarah Longwell talks about that in this video. I don't know if she talks about those stats in this part I'm going to play you, but she's going to talk about independence here. And so there are some people that say, well, hang on, surely everyone knows who they're going to vote for, and like, how swingy are the independents still? And there's an interesting kind of differentiation between some subgroups of independents.
I guess the question then is, how big a universe do we imagine this undecided voter pool to be? Because to me,
undecided, not independents. I got that wrong. So in other words, you still undecided?
And to a lot of people who follow this stuff, it seems crazy to be undecided at this point in time, right? Like, these two candidates, Trump is a well-known figure. Everyone has opinions on him. Either you love him or you hate him. She less so, but she has been vice president. So how possibly big is this undecided pool?
I mean, it's real and meaningful. Look, everybody talks about the late-breaking independents, right? And there's a couple different groups of people. There are people who are pretty high info, which is a lot of the groups that I'm talking about. They watch things close enough and they want to hear a case being made. Then there's the people who are just tuning in right now. They're like, oh yeah, there's an election coming up. Which one of these people? And look, the fact is, these are normal, busy people. And for a lot of people, sometimes people think about undecided as a category of people that are like, which one will I choose between the two candidates? That is one category of undecideds. Sure. But there's also the undecided category of like, am I going to vote in this election? Like, am I going to decide to get off the couch and go do something?
So important. So it's not about like, I'm always going to vote Democrat or I'm always going to vote Republican, but can I be bothered to vote this cycle? So it's about motivating the electorate to get out and actually vote, and communicating that it's worthwhile for them, and then being enthused enough by any given candidate. And if you don't know who Kamala Harris is, and you probably would vote Democrat, but you're not really bothered because you don't really know much about hers, and you're too busy worrying about other things, you're a low information voter, not the people like you and I that are sitting here watching videos like I'm showing you, where someone's looking at the statistics of Lehigh, northwest part of Philadelphia, and saying, "Whoa, if Kamala Harris gets 43%," no. These are people like, I'm going to watch season 6 of Below Deck again, and that's my life, or whatever. So, how do either of these nominees break through to those people? How do they get enthused?
And I also think she has created much more enthusiasm among people who were otherwise going to sit it out. But now there's like another group of people who are more low info, more or less like less interested in elections.
And we're sort of seeing that, right? Like, she's got I remember I think the ABC News Ipsos poll showed black voters are way more enthusiastic or more engaged than they were 4 weeks ago, though frankly, what Democrat isn't, right? But she's gotten the base motivated to a degree, and now it's sort of how do you expand it? The question is like, okay, obviously the debate really matters, right? We're talking about tens of millions of people watching the debate. What should she do beyond the debate?
Well, look, I think she just put out her website today got updated with all of her policy positions.
Who the hell reads a website? Come on.
No, nobody's going to, but that's what she's got to go out and talk about some of those things. Talk about what she learned as vice president. And she's been doing a good job of reaching out to these types of voters, putting Kinzinger in prime time. That was good. She's got to talk about the economy a lot, offense on the economy. Donald Trump is still winning with sort of they've got this amnesia where they think they take the pandemic and they put it in its own box, and they just think about the good old times when Trump was tweeting and the economy was better. And so she has got to go hard on a positive case for the economy. And this thing about looking presidential, Like, I think she's got to do a lot more reps in media. Not she doesn't have to do traditional media, right? I think she's got to get out there with influencers. She's just got to talk a lot more. People have got to know who she is and what she stands for.
Come on the board.
So this is really interesting. It's something that's been leveled against Kamala Harris is that she hasn't done any big interviews. She has done CNN, and she has actually done some other interviews that people don't realize. So she's been on like a black radio station, and obviously that's not important enough, and et cetera, et cetera. But we'll talk about this in a bit, because the view of Pod Save America is like, you would never have expected someone to have done all these interviews, to have even had like their whole policy manifesto sorted out when they've only just taken over. So people forget that the switcheroo of Biden for Harris has only just happened, and she has a different platform, a different agenda, and she has to create that from scratch. Like, she's not just taking Biden's already created campaign and saying, right, yeah, what you were going to say, I'm going to say that, and that takes time. And people are saying, you've got to be doing these interviews, and right, really criticizing for her for that. But actually, it's been quite unrealistic, especially when she's also needing to prepare for the debate. So all of that comes after the debate, but we'll come to that soon. So there are definitely there's worse news, I think, in terms of the Senate. So it's already very close for the it's a close race all over the shop. But right now there's a very close Senate where it's 51 to 49. You get certain independents caucus for the Democrats, but senators come up for election once every 6 years individually, but actually they're split between 3 different cycles, if you like. So every 2 years, a third of senators come up to finish their term, and then 2 years later, it's another third of senators, and then 2 years after that, another third. The third that are up now are it just so happens that this is very bad for Democrats. So they are losing people like Joe Manchin's resigned. It's never going to be a Democrat that replaces him that gets voted in there. You've got another bunch of people where it's not looking very good for Democrats. So there's a very high chance that Democrats are going to lose control of the Senate. And some of these ones that were looking quite good, like John Tester in Montana, is actually now, Sheehy, the guy he's against, is looking... He's now down 8 points in a new independent poll against Tim Sheehy. And it's not looking good there, even though John Tester is, I think, supposed to be really sort of decent, a decent candidate there. And there are other senatorial races that are not looking good for the Democrats. But there's also a couple of quite interesting ones as well. So we go back to the map. There's a Senate race in Texas where Ted Cruz is up against Colin Allred, and the margin there is much smaller than people were expecting. And also Tim Scott in Florida against what's her name? She's Puerto Rican, Venezuelan, or original from that kind of neck of the woods as a family. She's really close to Tim Scott there. I think maybe 3 points behind in the last poll, which is very close in Florida. And that is trending more. I mean, these states are at the moment trending, not so much Florida, but Texas is trending more and more Democrat. And there's thoughts that in 2028, that will be a blue state. You know, it's certainly getting towards being purple. So really interesting movements in Texas. But there could be a couple of senators that are wild card wins for the Democrats that could offset some of these ones they're looking at losing. So there's some funky stuff that could happen in terms of the senatorial races there. But certainly there are growing challenges with the Senate, even... in spite of the growing trends towards Harris in national polls and in certain states, we continue to see endorsements for Kamala Harris. So retired Army Lieutenant General and former Republican, says, I know for a fact that leaders of many of our NATO allies are very concerned about what it would mean to have Trump as a president. As a leader of NATO's leading nation, they are very concerned about that. So on and so forth. We're seeing this quite often. Indeed, it's got to the point where, in fact, let's look at where is it? We have some adverts. Yeah, here they are. I had them next up. So this advert has just kind of hit, and it is talking to exactly that. So let's play this and see. I wonder how. I don't think it's got huge ad buys, this one, but it is, I think, exactly what they needed to do. And I actually would have added a few more quotes and names to this too.
In 2016, Donald Trump said he would choose only the best people to work in his White House. Now those people have a warning for America. Trump is not fit to be president again. Here's his vice president.
Anyone who puts themselves over the Constitution should never be president of the United States. It should come as no surprise that I will not be endorsing Donald Trump this year.
His defense secretary.
Do you think Trump can be trusted with the nation's secrets ever again?
No. I mean, it's just irresponsible action that places our service members at risk, places our nation's security at risk.
His national security advisor.
Donald Trump will cause a lot of damage. The only thing he cares about is Donald Trump.
And the nation's highest ranking military officer.
We don't take an oath to a king or a queen or to a tyrant or a dictator. We don't take an oath to a wannabe dictator.
Take it from the people who knew him best. Donald Trump is a danger to our troops and our democracy. We can't let him lead our country again.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
And I think that's a really effective ad for what it's intending to do. Now, will it persuade anyone? There might be some disaffected Republican voters who might look at that. How will it affect any of these low information voters that you need to get at? I don't know that it necessarily will, but I think that's exactly the sort of advert that you need to throw into the mix. Then there's this quite combative advert, because it's the sort of advert that's going to get, and I think it's only just come out today, just the last few hours possibly, and it's going to get Donald Trump really riled.
Here's a 78-year-old billionaire who has not stopped whining about his problems.
Oh, she had a big crowd. Oh, the crowd.
This weird obsession with crowd sizes. It just goes on and on and on. America's ready for a new chapter. We are ready for a President Kamala Harris.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this.
So that's just a real dig in. That's a kick in the shins for Trump, and that's trying to get him riled up because he keeps rising to those. So interesting approach there. Anyway, the endorsement thing was really what I was talking about, and you've seen so many people endorsing Kamala Harris from the Republican side, but no one really going from the Democrat to the Republican unless you include Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr., which I wouldn't really. So anyway, there's that. Right. Now, we're just going to dip, before we go into some other bits and pieces to finish off, we're going to dip into this idea that there's a big old difference between young men and young women in the way that they are probably going to vote, and their voting behavior and their political inclinations, really. And it's why you are seeing Donald Trump being interviewed on social media, that almost not quite alt-right, but the young men gaming, from Joe Rogan, Logan, what's his name, the boxing YouTuber, all these people that are going to appeal to young men. That's where Trump is going at the moment, and for good reason, because actually there's a real divergence between young men and young women. Young women are skewing far more Democrat. In fact, more so than young men are skewing Republican, but it is a marked difference. So Michael Weiss here says the Department of Justice, Russia aimed propaganda at gamers, minorities to swing 2024 election. It's that gamers bit for me. The Russians know this as well, and it's why they're getting involved in that kind of area. It's why you see Tim Pool and Benny Johnson and Taylor Hanson and all these people who appeal predominantly to younger men being targeted by the Russian disinformation campaigns. And it plays into that whole idea, the Elon Musk sort of tech bro side of the electorate is all about freedom of speech.
Second, I will bring back free speech in America because it's been taken away. They've taken away your free speech, and the fake news is a threat to this country. They are just horrible. These are horrible people. Not everyone. I mean, I know most of them up there. Some are good. Hello, Brian. No, some are good, and most of them are just absolutely terrible human beings. They know what's going on. You know what they'll write today? But look at this crowd. It goes from corner to corner. It's a mess. I flew over and I said, that's a lot of people down there. And you know what they'll say today or tomorrow when they write? Donald Trump spoke today in Wisconsin before a small crowd of people, a small gathering of people. They are just so bad. I don't know. It's it's really hard to turn it back around unless they used to be like the police force. They'd write the truth, but they're no longer the police force. They're the police force for opposite. They're a police force for bad. They're bad.
This is another example of where he's just talking absolute nonsense, word salad rubbish.
They're bad people, and they're very dishonest. And a lot of people don't understand. When you're a politician like these people, like me, like others, and you happen to be a Republican or somewhat conservative, they write just the opposite of what the facts are. And if you're driving a cab, if you're an accountant, if you're a lawyer, if you're something, other than that, you don't know the details. When we know the facts and then the story gets written the exact opposite of what it is, you start to lose faith in the press, I will tell you.
And it's really interesting. If you actually wrote down, if you read the transcript out, if I read that transcript out to you, you would realize how nonsensical it was, and his syntax is all over the shop. It's just garbled message, but you get the point. He's attacking the press.
But I will sign an executive order banning any federal employee from colluding to limit speech, and we will fire every federal bureaucrat who is engaged in domestic censorship under the Harris regime.
And he keeps talking about this in the moment. It's really worrying. That's something that Harris can bring up in the debate. It's like, and talk to the electorate. Say, do you want to see the armed forces going around rounding people up? For, because he's talking about how he wrote a big, long Truth Social post about how he's going to arrest all these cheaters and election officials and all this. It's like, speak to, is that what you want? Do you actually want to see the army being used as Trump's tool to go and arrest half of the nation? And, and then, of course, he's talking about the bloody story of rounding up immigrants and shipping them off, 10 million, 15 million immigrants or whatever it is. And so, yeah, it's there are areas where I think if she says it in the right way and speaks to the audience in the right way, then they could be powerful topics to talk about. Now, going back to the whole kind of young men versus young women situation, there's been pollsters have noted a gender gap between Harris and Trump, and it's now more aligned with recent elections. The gap has typically been about 19 points in exit polls since 1996. The movement among women and men is that in the new survey occurred the most among white voters, pollsters found. Trump had a 13-point advantage among white women before the Democratic convention and now has a 2-point edge. So white women have moved more towards Harris. By comparison, the former president had a 13-point advantage among white men prior to the convention, now has a 21-point edge. So there's been an 8-point movement in young men towards Trump, and an 11-point move in women away from Trump. So actually he loses. Assuming that you got the same amount of women as men, then he loses on balance there. But it's just that divergence between the two that's so marked. Women are seen as a key voting bloc that has powered Harris's successful presidential campaign rollout. Here, there's a CNN article. I found this particularly interesting. In 2013, the share of young men aged 18 to 29 who call themselves conservative very slightly exceeded the share who identified as liberal, while the reverse was true for young women. According to to results provided by Public Opinion Strategies, the GOP half of the partnership that conducts the NPC poll, the GOP half of the partnership that conducts the NBC poll, For each gender, though, the balance between conservatives and liberals was nearly even. In their 2023 results, the pollsters found that young men had shifted slightly left, with slightly more now identifying as liberal than conservative. But over the same 10-year period, young women had sped leftwards. In the 2023 results, 3 times as many of them identified as liberal than as conservative. In 2013, the share of self-identified liberals among young women exceeded the share among young men by 5 percentage points. By 2023, the gap was nearly 4 times as large. These shifts over time have produced a situation where younger men are still more liberal than older men on most issues, but not nearly as liberal as younger women. The annual youth poll conducted by the Institute of Politics at Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School offers perhaps the best snapshot of the gender divergence among younger adults. In this year's survey, young men were 15 points more likely than young women to support building Trump's border wall, 12 points more likely to say same-sex relationships are morally wrong, and 11 points more likely to say Israel's response to Hamas in Gaza has been justified. Still, in each case, only a minority of younger men endorsed those conservative viewpoints. So there you go. I mean, there's way more to say on that. I could bore you more, but I'm actually going to take you across to John Favreau, Tommy Vitor, and John Lovett here for PodSave. Oh, no, it's actually... John Favreau talking to Max Fisher on the PodSave America podcast about this topic.
It's called How and Why Trump is Targeting Gen Z Men, in which he highlights the absolutely massive gender gap between Gen Z men and women. Mm-hmm. I'll just put some statistics behind this. So the latest Times Siena polls in the 6 swing states that have Kamala slightly ahead show a giant gender gap, especially among young voters, more so among young voters than older generations. Yeah. She's up by 38 points with women between 18 to 29, but Trump is up by 13 points among young men. Among young men, the Democratic advantage in partisan identification, which is more stable than what happens from election to election, it fell from 9 points in 2012 when Obama ran for re-election to just 5 points in 2023.
For under 30s?
For under 30s. Okay. Democratic advantage, yeah. And what's interesting to know about this group of voters, this group of young men, a majority in this group still supports abortion rights, same-sex marriage. They are not necessarily socially conservative, but almost half of them say that there is some or a lot of discrimination against men in American society more than older age groups.
Really? So what's fascinating about this is that young men appear to be actually quite socially liberal, but feel aggrieved and feel that the society is going too far in favor of people who aren't them, right?
Say that, and up from a third who said that just in 2019.
Really?
Yeah,
Among
and now there's
men?
a half. Yeah.
Huh.
I know. And these are a lot of, I mean, that's, at least a bunch of Democratic men in that group. Again, support same-sex marriage, support abortion rights.
Yeah.
So it's not the social conservative stuff that's getting them.
Right.
It is more of this
They're
cultural vibes kind of thing. So what do you make of that? What do you make of this gender gap?
So a note on the Times Siena poll and the gender gap there. What it found is that Gen Z men support Trump at actually comparable rates to millennial men and to boomer men. The reason for the gap is that Gen Z women are so much more supportive of Kamala than women in other generations. So there is an unusually...
So that's kind of what the CNN article was saying, and indeed the other one too, from MSN, who was it? Is a Hill. It's pretty much saying that actually, although people are talking a lot about how men have gone more right wing, it's like they broadly stayed in line with older generations. It's just a woman have skewed really towards the Democrats.
Wide gender gap among Gen Z, but it's mostly from women being much more pro Kamala than men being pro MAGA. But the lead that Kamala has among under 30s is just plus 16, which is down from plus 24 that Biden had in 2022. So it's definitely a problem. I think my read, and you kind of hinted at this, is I think that it is a gender polarization problem first and an internet problem second, like just a gender polarization thing that's getting routed through the internet. There's this theory by a guy named Michael Kimmel called aggrieved entitlement. Have you heard this theory?
No.
So it says that the backlash among young men is this sense that the world is less and less favorable to young men, but where that comes from is just there is inching steps towards progress in society for women and for people of color. And so the way that a lot of young men experience that is that they thought they were going to be as entitled as the generation before them as young men, and they feel that they have less of a special place than they used to, and that feels like something is being taken away. And that's like something that you hear in like Gamergate 10 years ago. It's something you hear 20 years ago. It's kind of a like persistent thing, but it becomes more and more pronounced as gender and racial equality makes its baby steps towards a better direction. And this is especially pronounced among non-college people without college diplomas, which shows up a lot in the gender polarization data. And then I think a lot of
there's a lot to be said about sort of grievance narrative psychology. So the idea that Christians in America often talk about being persecuted when actually they're not persecuted at all. And when you look at statistics, actually they're more privileged in the US than any other kind of faith or non-faith group that exists. But it's a persecution narrative that is perpetuated almost mythologically, and that becomes a problem, becomes baked into the psyche of many people. Yeah, these persecution narratives or these grievance, this kind of like zero-sum game. It's like if women get more rights, it means we have less rights. So by them getting kind of equal pay, I'm getting paid less, or my opportunities are going down, and so on and so forth. Is that kind of
it is social
thinking?
Isolation, which may play a role in why it's so much higher among young men, where the rate of men who do not have close friends is way, way up. Mm-hmm. Who have zero close friends is up from 2 to 10% among college graduates, and among non-college graduates is up from 3% to 24%. It's people who say they have no close friends. And I think that sends people into, bad podcasts, the internet, when you don't have a kind of community to anchor yourself. And then what you do is you go look for answers to say, why do I have this feeling of aggrieved entitlement? Why do I feel like my special status is being taken away by society?
And someone will have answers for you.
Right. Someone will have answers. We know that the algorithm will provide a set of answers that is going to be the most polarizing, the most outrage-inducing.
Enter stage left or stage right, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, David Sachs.
The most kind of radicalizing, and then communities form on
Tim
the internet
Pool.
or among podcasts around those answers that say it's the
Charlie
feminists,
Kirk.
it's video game companies, whatever it is, and that now your entire sense of self is built around the answer that your community on the internet gave you for why you feel like something's being taken away. And I think that a big part of the increase in that on under 30s is just the pandemic. I think a lot of people spent 2 or 3 years indoors finding community on the internet when it's mediated through algorithms that were pushing them towards the worst possible answers for the problems they felt they were facing.
I also think that there is...
And I find that absolutely fascinating and entirely plausible and highly probable.
A difference between hearing that there is a pay gap between men and women, mm-hmm. and that women should get paid just like men do, mm-hmm. that that women should have the right to choose, that there has been historic discrimination against women in the mm-hmm. workforce, that there has been sexual harassment and assault that women have had to deal with, right? Like, there's a difference between that and then young men being told that, like, they are to blame for things.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? And so
mm-hmm.
it's like the, what is wrong with men?
Yeah.
Kind of discourse
right.
that was, probably peaked in like 2017, 2018, 2019.
Sure.
But I do think, and I think young women now are doing better in school, tending
mm-hmm.
to achieve more. And economically, you hear a lot of these young men say that, like, they, you used to be able to raise a family with a college degree, and now you can't.
Right.
And so they feel like their place
mm-hmm.
in the world, not just culturally, but economically.
Right.
And, like, they're still raised with the traditional notion of family and masculinity. So they're like, okay, I'm supposed to support the family, but I can't.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that tell me about who I am and stuff like that? And that...
And you throw that together with that zero-sum game effect or psyche, and then, the interesting stuff there. And the question will be, in this short time left now, 2 months left, is how will each side play, how will each side think about those different demographics and appeal to them. Now, just going to other sort of news bits, as I mentioned, there's some really weird stuff to do with, this is JD Vance as vice president just spouting absolute horse manure. In the last several weeks, my office has received many inquiries from actual residents of Springfield who said their neighbours' pets or local wildlife were abducted by Haitian migrants. It's possible, of course, that all of these rumours will turn out to be false. But let's just go for them anyway. Do you know what's confirmed? There was a child murdered by a Haitian migrant who has no right to be here. Local health service have been overwhelmed. The communicable diseases like TB and HIV have been on the rise. Local schools have struggled to keep blah, 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 blah. So it's all this kind of like, let's take a particular subset of migrants and demonize them. And then I'm just going to throw in this other conspiracy theory that's going around the internet. It might be rubbish, but I'm going to say it anyway, because let's demonize them even further and say, and they've been eating people's pets too. Just, crazy sort of stuff. That seems to be, obviously building on anti-immigration sentiments. I mean, Elon Musk here, just, you go down the feeds like this, and this goes back to algorithms being so important. 153 illegal alien sex offenders arrested this past year in Baltimore alone. Actual offences committed far exceed arrests, so on and so forth. All that kind of stuff just gets thrown in to demonize. But I thought this was quite interesting. Ron Filipkowski says, new story about Haitians in Springfield, Ohio, where the cat hoax originated. CEO of McGregor Metal said, quote, I wish I had 30 more. That's Haitians. Our Haitians come to work every day. They don't have a drug problem. They'll stay at their machine. There's a stark difference from what we're used to. In other words, the indigenous population there is both lazier and has more of an issue with drugs. And the Haitians come in and work really hard, and there you go. So, there's an actual real example of someone giving you some, albeit anecdotal, data from that company, and then you have, Haitians are eating cats. And then you've got people spreading that. So we've seen, I think, is it Elon Musk has spread those rumors, JD Vance, big names that are just, Anyway, there you go. Right, let's pop back to the Podcast America group.
The other piece of this too, I think people have been like, well, does that mean the Harris campaign made a mistake by not having a policy platform on their website sooner? Like, I find that all pretty ridiculous. Like, if you go back and look at old polls of previous elections, it takes a while for people to stop telling pollsters that they need to know more.
So this is to deal with the complaint that Harris hasn't yet done enough interviews and there's not enough policy information on her website. So or whatever, she's not talking about policy early enough, etc., etc. It needs to be more substance. And of course, Trump hasn't given any substance at all and just can't even describe childcare initiatives in any way, shape, or form. And he gets away with it because he's, graded on a curve, and it's just completely different. One rule for one and another for someone else. But these accusations against Harris, as I mentioned, are slightly unfair because she's only just sort of taken over and has to start from scratch, from not running for president to suddenly being the Democrat nominee.
This campaign is abbreviated. This is the cost of having it abbreviated.
Yeah, I almost went back and then I realized I wasn't going to go do this. But if you did like the amount of time between the candidate announcing their campaign and when they had a full policy page up, I'm sure this broke records for being quick.
Yes.
In terms of the Harris campaign.
This is why this conversation about why hasn't Kamala done interviews is so stupid. But think about, she hasn't been a candidate for it's been less than 2 months. She had to plan a convention, pick a VP, do debate prep, think, lay out, decide on her policy platform. she's going to do a bunch of interviews. I'm sure she'll do a ton of them after the debate prep, which, by the way, is going to serve as interview prep as well. So it's just like we're kind of fast forwarding getting mad about something when she's barely been in the race.
If we are having this conversation at the end of September and she still hasn't done a bunch of interviews, I'll be right there criticizing that.
Me too.
Right? You know, it's silly to do it now. There hasn't been time, and she's got to. The debate is the most important thing. Prepping for the debate is the most important thing.
By far.
That should take precedence over any kind of interview request at this point.
Totally agree with that. 100% agree with that. Then there's an interesting bit of news coming out about the Judge Chutkan court case that actually Robert Reich is going to talk through, that I think is incredibly revealing. I'll let him talk it through.
The presidential election, the DC trial, there's been some news on that. What are we thinking?
Judge Chutkan actually moved the trial dates, has a schedule down for the trial, which is almost certainly going to put the trial. Remember, this is the big trial. This is Trump trying to overthrow the election results into 2025, which is. Well, obviously, I mean, it's going to have no impact on the election. However, Jack Smith, the special counsel, has until September 26th to present his arguments as to why the case should continue, notwithstanding the Supreme Court's immunity decision. And in his presentation of all of his evidence as to why the case should continue, he might be able to put all the evidence, all the allegations, all the explosive stuff in before the 26th of September or around the 26th of September. So this is a kind of a hidden September surprise.
This is so important, right? You talk about the October surprise, which is just before the elections in November. Each side try and put out something that blows the other side apart. So it was the hot mic tapes from that were recorded years before in 2016, but it didn't work amazingly. Like, people still voted for Trump, even though he talked about, grabbing organs of females and blah, blah, blah. That's an example of an October surprise. So it comes up and then people go, oh my God, I can't vote for them. And then they switch to the other side or whatever. So people are thinking, well, what could be the October surprises coming up here? There's been long been talked about that there is this video out there, or also audio recording at least, of Donald Trump using the N-word for when he was doing The Apprentice. That exists. Whether that could be, because now it's not, I think it was part of an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, and so they couldn't release it, and now I think that's expired. And so there's talk that could be part of it. But this is like a version of that is a bit of a people weren't expecting it, and people were getting all depressed because these court cases are just being kicked into the long grass. And this is the big court case, and actually moving it to 2025 is an issue because it's not going to be resolved. It's not going to, Trump's not going to have to deal with that before the election. But Jack Smith, as a special prosecutor, will then have to submit that evidence before September the 26th, great day, my birthday, and thereby putting all the information into the public space. And that information is going to be super explosive. So actually that it could end up being a good thing that they've moved the court case in that way, because the evidence will hit the public domain before the election as a kind of October surprise in September. Now, here we've got Lawrence O'Donnell talking about something that is really annoyed me, which is the sane washing of Trump's speeches and everything he says. And I talked about this a couple of years ago, whereby journalists routinely edit what Trump says in public because what he says doesn't actually make syntactical sense. And so they edit it so that when you read an article, you actually understand what Trump is saying. But actually, when you listen to his words and transcribe them exactly, he makes no sense. And journalists are being accused routinely of facilitating Trump's successes by not showing quite how nuts the man is.
Well, they are finally trying. Here they are trying. Here's the latest attempt at trying. The elements of the news media that have been accused of sane washing Donald Trump know that they are guilty of exactly that. And now some of them, like the New York Times, they really, really are trying to do something about it. But this is their first try. So it's not perfect. The New York Times' first try was published tonight under the headline, "As debate looms, Trump is now the one facing questions about age and capacity," with a sub-headline reading, "His rambling, sometimes incoherent public statements have stirred concern among voters." The Times article does not use the term sane washing, which describes the way some in the news media edit Donald Trump's crazy statements down to a shape that allows them to then try to make sense of them. But the article does offer the New York Times' own confession about doing exactly that. Here is the New York Times confession in writing tonight in this article. Often his mangled statements are summarized in news accounts in ways that do not give the full picture of how baffling they can be. The New York Times has done that every single day. The New York Times has been covering Donald Trump, the politician, including in this article tonight. They couldn't get through the whole article without doing it. In this article, the New York Times is trying to cure itself of its habit of sane washing Donald Trump. And in the very next passage after the one that I just read, the New York Times tries to sane wash what Donald Trump said last week to these stupid rich people at the New York Economic Club who clapped enthusiastically for Donald Trump's incoherent response to a question about child care, a response that was not an answer. It was a widely criticized, incoherent jumble that did not answer the question about child care in any way. And in the article tonight, the New York Times thought they could cure their sane washing habit by quoting a larger portion of what Donald Trump said about child care instead of the short, sane washed bits that they used in the coverage of that event last week. Here is the New York Times attempt at a cure for its own habit of sane washing, in which, in the end, it sane washes Donald Trump again. Tonight's article says that because quoting Donald Trump at length, quote, can provide additional context, here is a more extended account of his reply on affordable child care. It's a very important issue, but I think when you talk about the kind of numbers that I'm talking about, that because child care is child care, there's something, you have to have it. In this country, you have to have it. But when you talk about those numbers compared to the kind of numbers that I'm talking about by taxing foreign nations at levels that they're not used to, but they'll get used to it very quickly, and it's not going to stop them from doing business with us, but they'll have a very substantial tax when they send product into our country. Those numbers are so much bigger than any numbers that we're talking about, including childcare, that it's going to take care.
And that is good that New York Times is doing that. But as he goes on to say, then in the next paragraph, they kind of let him off the hook with the way that they present it. But anyway, this is a really serious problem that I think news media organizations need to deal with. Unfortunately, I saw the Fox News representations of what he said there, or their analysis, and there was one of the news anchors was like, this is really good for Trump. He is laying out more substantially, than we've seen recently, his approach to childcare, and some of it's really good, and blah blah blah. And you're like, are you watching something completely different to what I was watching? Because that's not what happened at all, and he did not remotely come across as anything other than massively incoherent. Anyway, that's enough from me waffling on as ever. I am going to just leave you with this. This is brilliant. So absolutely love this. Here we have a poster, holy crapola, some Trump idiot translated a sign into Latin for their Latin American audience. So they're going, oh, we need to get some signage up for the Latin American people living around here. So someone's taken that away, gone on to Google, and obviously like, I want to translate this into not Spanish, but Latin. So you've got this poster that's Vota pro Trump. Legales Hispanici Latini, or however it would have been pronounced in Latin. Familia Opera Securitas. It's just like, and someone from Honduras is going to be looking at that going, what? What's going on there? I mean, I'm all for bringing Latin back into common usage, but anyway, hopefully that was of interest. Looking at different bits and pieces of the campaign. I wanted to get this out before the debate, although most of you won't see this before the debate. A debate's going to be absolutely huge. We'll see who comes out better in a very short while, and see whether that has the impact on the electorate that many people think it might, or whether it'll all die down after that and you'll return to some kind of campaign mean. We'll see. But again, it's all about Pennsylvania, in my opinion. Pennsylvania is key. A few other ones. North Carolina is looking interesting. But let me know what you think in the thread in the comments below as to whether you agree or disagree. And please substantiate if you disagree with anything I have said. Take care, guys. Speak soon.